Once more, hello to this workshop by Cassie Thornton on the hologram. And here I would like to pass over to Valeria for her introductory words. Thank you very
much. Thank you, Andrea, and hi everyone, welcome. I'm really glad to be part of this workshop. My name is Valeria Graziano. I'm one of the co-conveners together with Tomislav Medak and Marcel Mars of Pirate Care. Pirate Care is a research process based in the transnational space, mainly of Europe, or with some digression, and Cassie being one of them. But we've been working for about a year right now. And just briefly to contextualize the work that we've been doing, Pirate Care, with this term, we're trying to basically sensitize, to name and kind of group and map a lot of initiatives that we started to notice are cropping up to respond in very concrete ways to the very, very real and tangible crisis of care that we're living through, which is not a phenomenon of the last few months. It's actually something that many people have been experiencing for far longer. So a few years ago, we started to reflect around trends such as the increasing criminalization of care in terms of solidarity with migrants. We see people being arrested and prosecuted for trying to share knowledges or offer drinking waters even to people crossing deserts. Another aspect is the defunding of public infrastructures of care, the defunding of hospitals, kindergartens, schools, and so forth and so on. So within this, what we've been trying to do, and we're still engaged in doing, so we're always happy to have more people joining this process, is to create a transnational and translocal, maybe more precisely, a kind of network of activists and militant people and practitioners that are interested to learn from each other and maybe share tools and techniques and technologies and just any kind of apparatus that we can use to take care of each other, but also to repoliticize a number of problems that we're faced with the care question. So the way we do so, it's the way we share then in turn what the findings are is through what we call a collective syllabus, which lives online, is a repository, is a website with a bunch of resources, books, zines, links to all kinds of tools for learning together around practices of pirate care. And you will, if you want to visit it, it's at syllabus.pirate.care. And the documents are basically organized around some topics, and each of them can be explored through smaller sessions. And this is very much work in progress. We presented to the world the first version of the syllabus at Kunstalebyen on the 8th of March this year, just before the world went into lockdown, or our part of the world went into the lockdown. And so what was supposed to be a short program of activation, of workshops where we were hoping to learn from each other in co-presence, had to be moved online. So we're very happy that Cassie Thornton is here with us as a facilitator of the workshop today. Cassie is an artist and activist from the US, but she's currently living in Canada. And she's the co-director of an amazing space called the Reimagining Value Action Lab in Thunder Bay. And she's also an activist with a feminist indigenous patrol group called Window Debwe Mosewin. I hope I'm not mispronouncing it too much. And she will tell you a bit more about the work that the patrol has been doing. So Cassie's practice today with the hologram, maybe I can conclude by saying this, that it's not a pirate practice in the sense of breaking the law, perhaps, or it's not an example of disobedience in that sense, but we strongly believe in paracare that there is a continuum, and sometimes it takes even more courage to disregard social norms and received habits. And some of the habits that we receive are maybe a bit toxic around care practices, so they need all of our imagination to be reconfigured, I think, for the time coming. So there is a lot of disobedient care in Cassie's work. Everyone.
Thank you. It's so nice to see everyone. I mean, half of the people here are like really good friends. So thank you so much for coming. I mean, it's like exactly what I would always want, especially for this project, which is really about like creating networks that can outlast really tough situations. So thank you. And yeah, obviously, thank you so much to Pirate Care and to Valeria and to Andrea, to Flora for all your help organizing this. And I put together the that Rise Up pad. And if you, I'm trying to not, I've done a lot of Zoom workshops lately, and I know that time is a whole other thing inside of Zoom. So because there's a bunch of stuff that I would really like to say that I don't actually have time to say, I put some stuff at the bottom of the Zoom pad. So there's the agenda, and the agenda is quite simple. I'm gonna try to get us to have a break in probably about 45 minutes. And before that, I'm just gonna talk about the hologram and how it works, and then we can have a discussion. And then we're gonna have a 10 or 15 minute break, and then we'll come back together and we'll do a kind of physical exercise mixed with the visualization that I've been doing for ages, and some people in this group have done it many times. And then we'll do sort of breakout group work, and then come back together. And I think that part will help you, if you're really interested in the practice, I think that will help you actually like sort of feel how it works a little bit. And so at the bottom of the pad, of the Rise Up pad, is just like a list of kind of like the ancestors of the project. So some stuff, if I remember to mention projects, then you can look them up on the pad, so you don't have to rush to take notes if you don't want to. And then there's just a list of the many, many people that have worked on the project. And because obviously this is not a project that a person does alone. So I'm gonna share my screen, which is always trickier than it seems. And it was my request to see people's faces. So if you want to turn your video off, turn it off. If you leave it on, it's just for me so that I remember that there are people there and I can see your reactions, because it's hard to just talk into space. So this image is actually my living room. Just kidding. It's on Lake Superior, which is a couple of blocks from where I live in Canada. I live in Thunder Bay in Ontario, in what is now called Canada. And these are three people out of, well, there was a photo shoot that was much bigger, but these are three people of the group who I work on various different kind of mutual aid projects with in Thunder Bay. And I think I only see a gray page. I don't see. I saw before when you switched to the shared screen, I saw kind of the list of images, and now it's white. Yeah, now yeah. What do you see now? Yeah, now I see. I see the presentation. Okay. With also the index of images on the left side, which actually wouldn't bother me. But when you switched, I think, to full screen, then we lost it. Great. Okay, so this is my living room, and this is in Thunder Bay on Lake Superior. This is just an image that kind of, to me, represents a little bit about some of, like, a lot of the practices that I think are in the hologram that I've learned have come from working in Thunder Bay. It is I've lived, before Thunder Bay, I'm from like Northern Illinois, and then I moved to New York City, and then I moved to San Francisco, and took little bouts of time in other cities, but then moved to rural Canada, and began to do a whole lot of different type of much more sort of direct action support work. And a lot of what I'm doing comes particularly from one group that I work with, which is called Window Debwe Masewin, and that is written in the pad so that you don't have to try to spell it if you want to look it up. But also many other projects. The person that is in the Adidas outfit is an organizer for, well, actually many things. But all the people in this image have taught me so much. And when I recently asked an astrologer and witch friend named Stella Lawless to draw a card for me to kind of describe what the hologram is and what its challenges are, she drew the Fool. And I'm not going to go too far into her reading of it, but there is an element of kind of stepping into the unknown with this project, because it is sort of organizing a social structure that I have never seen but have an unreasonable amount of faith in. And this image is by Amanda Priebe, and it's specifically designed because there's a book coming out from Pluto Press, which is like a very short pamphlet about the hologram. And it will come out in July, and it's really like a manual. So there will be something there that's physical that you can actually use if this is interesting to you. But the project begins actually in 2016. And I had brought together a couple of, 6 people from across the US who all were artists and activists, extremely precarious. And the idea was to get together for a week and think about what it would mean to share resources and cooperate and see if we could kind of like network our precarity and share, what would it mean to almost become a cooperative? And whether that meant sharing phone bills or when one person in the group ran out of money, having a plan for how to fix that. The dream was to sort of figure out what it would mean to be an intentional community in exile, how to be together, even though we don't really have a lot of the forms of stability that we thought we might have, like home or city or stable community, or access to medical care. And that was in Oakland, California, or this particular meeting was in Berkeley. And it resulted in a performance at the Berkeley Art Museum, which is why the project was funded. Why we could afford to fly everybody there was that we had basically a performance where we imagined what it would take to have a ceremony to die in the eyes of the state. And the hologram is something that kind of was already an idea, but that kind of came through this group of people. And we realized that we really needed a way to kind of figure out how to become more interdependent and more aware of our own sort of healthcare emergencies, because in a way, we didn't really realize that, in the pre-Trump era, that we already were living in a healthcare crisis. And so one of the main sort of projects became for me in creating the hologram is figuring out a way to say that all of our crises are connected. I come from a background of debt resistance. So for me, it started out in a funny way by being able to see how financial crises were networked. So how the foreclosure, or the, not foreclosure crisis, but how the housing crisis and massive gentrification in Oakland was related to the same hedge funds that were profiting off of the debt of Puerto Rico. I began to try to figure out ways to sort of understand how crises are connected, and how when there is a crisis, or when we admit that there is a crisis, that we can become much more creative and strategic and cooperative. And so the story really begins, I think, alongside the intentional community in exile. It starts also with the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki. So because I was studying debt for a long time, when the sort of Greek financial crisis, which was also a refugee crisis or an immigration crisis, when that happened, I was really, all my eyes were on Greece. And I think that one of the most interesting things that I never expected to be interested in was basically the doctors and nurses and masseuses and dentists and therapists began to volunteer and create free social solidarity clinics, free medical clinics all over Greece. And one particular clinic in Thessaloniki had a group of people organizing there called the Group for a Different Medicine. And they were particularly interested in not only how to give free care, but how to kind of upend some of the hierarchical tendencies of professional medicine. So the hierarchy between doctor and patient, the hierarchies between genders, the hierarchies between Greek and immigrant. And so they did a number of experiments in trying to kind of mess with those hierarchies. But one project in particular that was really meaningful to me, which sort of set this whole project into motion, is called the integrative care model. And so the project at the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki ended up moving to the workers' healthcare center in an occupied factory outside of Thessaloniki called Viome, and then moving back to the Thessaloniki one again, and that's where it currently exists. And the project that is so interesting within the integrative model is that when a patient would go to the clinic, they were seen by a therapist, a social worker, and a GP at the same time. And they would get together for 90 minutes and ask questions about what do you eat, where do you work, who is your family, to whom do you owe debts, are you lonely, and really ask about all senses of the person's health. And they stopped calling people patients and started calling these patients incomers. And part of that was as a way to change the idea of a patient, because patient in Greek kind of connotes someone who's unwell. So the incomer would work together with these three people, or not work together, but go through a kind of light interrogation for 90 minutes, and then have a physical exam, and then get back together with them and talk about a 1-year plan that they could enact together to create health for the incomer, whatever that meant. So if that meant getting a surgery, maybe one of the doctors at the clinic also still has a job at a hospital. Maybe they would sneak the person in. They had established free pharmacies with donations. Maybe they could get the medicine the person needed, but also maybe the person is lonely or needs to quit their job and actually just needs support in order to make decisions that would allow them to thrive. And so they would create a plan together for the incomer. And that seemed so revolutionary, but also so kind of familiar. Like, isn't that something that has always been happening in some way? And yet, that's something that I've definitely never experienced. And Froso Morelli is the person that I'm most in touch with from the Social Solidarity Clinic, who works with a group for a different medicine. And the reason that this project is called the Hologram is because she literally said that when we do this type of work, we make a person not flat, but we make them a hologram. Because when she only sees one side of the person, she can't even begin to help them the way that she can help them when she sees all the different sides. So there's amazing stories about how, like, getting to hear a little bit more about like the person's physical health can connect to like their family history, because she's a psychologist, and how she could begin to sort of understand what a person really needed, and it wasn't always just talk therapy, and she actually had a different type of access to health with the extra knowledge. So going back to the moment of 2016, and I was living in Oakland, and it wasn't a crisis, right? Like, it wasn't a crisis, even though there were homeless people living underneath every overpass, even though there was such huge racialized wealth inequality, even though most people I knew had no access to healthcare. But it wasn't a crisis. And so it didn't feel like what I saw happening in Greece could apply in some way. And, or even if it should apply, how could it apply? And even, I guess it was only just in March of this year, I was giving this presentation in London to a group of London people in person, if that's even possible to imagine anymore. And in a funny way, they really couldn't understand or identify with this situation because of the NHS and a major amount of faith in the NHS. And then, fast forward only a few months, and I would say they definitely identify with that situation now, in that it's really like things have changed very quickly, and all of a sudden and stability has not become something that most of us experience. So at this time, when we're all in a really precarious situation, the hologram is really actually about creating an opportunity to deal with unstable conditions, and still thinking about what you need in the long term anyway. So yeah, the question for me is, how do you actually admit and organize your own care before or during an emergency within a set of completely unstable conditions? Not that we all need a therapist, a social worker, and a GP, but how are we going to plan situations where we have the support we need in the future, when we know that we are at, within and among many crises now and into the future? What do I want to say about that? That's it. So the question became, when we're trying to figure out, okay, so we're in Oakland, where most of us have always had to pay for care. And in a weird way, it almost at the time felt like because we'd never experienced anything except for paying for private care, how would we begin to create situations where we would even be able to accept care for free, or in a different framework, without experts, without authority? And so at a really early point in the process, we came up with this list of questions about if a different medicine is possible. Can we do this without experts? Can we do this without space? Can we do this without money? Can we do this without stability? Can we do this when we're all a little sick? Can we do this when we've been taught that we can only trust experts? And can we do this when we don't even trust ourselves? And so for the hologram has been called the hologram for the last maybe 3-4 years. And the more time I've spent with it, the more it has become a project that's about sort of rebuilding the trust that has been broken by living only and having only experienced capitalism. And so it is a project that sort of challenges, like Valeria had said, challenges a lot of our habits and asks us to be disobedient with materials like time and energy, as a way of imagining a kind of a longer term future than I think we're usually allowed to imagine. And I'll explain that. So our idea for distributing the labor of attention and care is that we begin right here. I've labeled expert, which is also the hologram, but here's a person, and this person is now not a patient, but an expert, a person that is the person that knows the most in the world about their own health. And then we have 3 people. So a friend or acquaintance 1 who's gonna ask questions, these 3 people who are going to be looking after the hologram are what we've been calling the triangle. And these 3 people are not experts, and they're not pretending to be, and they're not giving advice, but they are becoming interested in the health of the hologram. So these 3 people are asking questions, and they might have, say, like a seasonal meeting together with the hologram, where one person focuses on asking questions about their mental and emotional experience, one person asks questions about their social experience, and one person asks questions about their physical experience. And here's just some examples, because all of these different areas obviously always overlap, and that's good. And just because we're trying to ask questions about these different sort of sections of a person's life doesn't mean that they won't bleed together. But I think that the way that these sort of divisions work is that when we're talking about something, for example, financial, it challenges us to ask a question about the body, when we think about money, our body leaves us. Or it challenges us to think about the social when things become really psychological. It brings other people back in. So I think it's this division is still interesting and working because it actually allows us to kind of keep the conversation balanced and to remember the social, the mental, emotional, and the physical when one of those things often might actually kind of like leave our awareness when we're talking really intensely about something. And the point of the project has really become about making decisions. So say that you are a hologram and you have 3 people and you've agreed to meet together every season for the next 5 years. And what we're doing together is building basically a kind of living medical record. The 3 people become like your living medical record because they've seen you season by season over many years. When, say, something intense comes up and a doctor tells you that you need a very expensive surgery, but it's a new doctor in your new city, and you are hysterical about it, but you need help in order to figure out if what this doctor is saying is legit. But here are 3 people that have been with you for a journey over the last 5, 10, whatever, 2 years, and they actually know enough to be able to help you do the research you need to do in order to figure out if you actually need that surgery or if that's the right decision. And the way that you get there so that you can actually be really useful for someone when it's time to make a big decision is asking really good questions and learning how that works in that particular group and noticing patterns that arise. So we all have patterns. It's pretty hard to monitor them yourself. And it really helps to have some people that are not only there with you to notice the patterns, but to actually share them with you when they see them. I think one of the most important parts of the project is about recognizing that the patient is the teacher in this model. So the person that is receiving the care is actually the one that is, in a weird way, responsible for the experience that's created. So as a teacher, they're responsible for articulating what's going on with them. And that is a skill that not only is not valued in our societies, but we just don't have practice doing that. So in a weird way, the teacher is responsible for articulating their needs, for teaching the others about how they're doing, and for getting the support that they need from people that want to give it to them. Because when do we ever get to learn how to get the help we need, even when people want to give it to us? And then, so the turning point happens here. So we have a triangle supporting a hologram. So you can imagine yourself as the hologram. You have 3 people. Maybe you've been meeting for a year and the group feels quite stable. And that would mean that it's time that the hologram grows because you can't really legitimately get support from people who are not supported. We know better. And so each of those people who are supporting you need to become holograms themselves. And the way that we've been practicing and looking at it now is that the hologram, the original hologram, actually supports the people that are supporting her to organize their triangle. So it's not something that it's never really something that you do alone. It's a part of the longer process. And then the final step is that the person who originally is the hologram, who receives the care and attention from the other people, in her triangle, eventually reciprocates, not by necessarily giving the same thing back that she got from her triangle, but by creating a hologram for someone new. So eventually maybe she has a friend or a coworker who has been watching from the sideline as the hologram plays out, and she offers to actually make that person a hologram and to be a member of their triangle. And so reciprocation is a much messier and more interesting thing in this project than it is in our highly transactional economic culture. So you can see how, in a weird way, there is never a chance for a kind of back and forth tit for tat exchange. It's like the care, the attention, the labor, it's flowing through the community, and you are paying back by creating more health, but not giving back exactly what you've been given, which is not something that is easy or natural in our culture. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. We've been obviously thinking a lot about viruses, and I think that the hologram works in 2 ways. I mean, I'm gonna explain more about what's been going on with it recently and how it's traveling, but like, it also is kind of like folklore. Like, it's something that is an idea that you can just explain and then let people do it as they will. So for example, like if I start doing it and then my triangle, they begin to develop their triangles and I support them, those triangles are going to have learned from what happened in my triangle. And then the way that the story gets told, or the way that the lessons that are learned in the previous triangle continuously affects the next ones. And so it is viral and it changes and morphs as it moves through different people. It's a very slow process, and I'll explain a little bit about how we're dealing with the slowness, but just setting it up, obviously imagining like the amount of bureaucracy, not bureaucracy, but the logistics that go into organizing people in this way takes a lot of energy, and eventually I think we'll be able to make it easier. But right now, the slowness and the labor that goes into it in a weird way is its power, because it goes so much against any idea of efficiency. And I think the important, like one thing that I just like to say is that this I like to believe that there's a way that this can never be taken up by Google or as some sort of neoliberal protocol to make a workplace better. It's not an initiative. It's it is made to create a social movement that will outlast capitalism and also maybe destroy it. So I feel like I have to put this in so that I remember to say these things, but this is not about helping governments enact austerity. It's not replacing their work. It is training for a post-capitalist future and the struggle that will be necessary in order to get there. It is based on the belief that we are cooperative species and we just have to remember how to do that. It is very predicated on the idea that difference and change are actually our greatest powers, that we can adapt and we do adapt, even though we're kind of like cats and we don't like to think that we do. Healing is difficult. The person who needs help is also potentially the most important teacher and has powers. And we can collectively solve our problems without permission or authority. So I added 3 things that I don't usually say, but because they've come up in lots of different situations, I just want to say them anyway. So this is not therapy. It's not a replacement for therapy. It's something different. This holds a different part of your life. It doesn't replace any sort of formal medical care. It goes underneath and below and beyond. It has the potential to create a sense of roots and belonging that allows you to handle the failures of medical systems and how sort of underwhelming most therapy is. It's something more. It's asking for a new type of relationship between people. Post-capitalist reciprocation looks different, and this is like a muscle, an example, I think, of a muscle that we need to build, that we have been really trained to kind of like give something in exchange for something else. And this is asking us to have a lot more patience and think about reciprocation in a much vaster way. Not saying that you don't give back what you take, because obviously capitalism has taught us horrible lessons about extraction, but that reciprocation can actually be about circulation, and it doesn't have to be hyper individualistic. And I think most important, especially for those of us that have not lived with chronic illness, that have been mostly considered healthy for our lives, that are not from a disability community, that needing support doesn't make you weak. And that I think actually being able to figure out how to talk about needing support is the thing that can break us out of so many of our super shitty capitalist tendencies and patriarchal and racist tendencies. So I'm getting to the end here. So there's 3 ways that the hologram currently is existing. A long time in coming, and oh, that's my alarm. And but things that I would love to invite you all to. The first thing is called a minimum viable hologram. This is found on the website. There's lots of different access points at on the Hologram website. But if you just went to the hologram.xyz/research, this is a kind of, it's a two-pronged project. It's social research and it's also outreach. So basically, I have a little bit of funding because I've been doing a residency. And that funding I'm using to pay people the London living wage for 2 hours as to come online with me or one other facilitator to use the hologram model for a conversation for basically an hour and a half, where whoever is the hologram or the convener of the meeting basically gets to invite 3 people that they know to talk about something, whether it's a crisis or it's just a tender spot that has to do with COVID. And so far it's been used, I think we're on our 7th person. We've just been doing it for about a month. But it's a pretty epic process, and I think it's been really, really useful and quite magical. And we use some somatic stuff mixed with some talking stuff. But the idea is that, like, if we did it for you, then, you know, you invite 3 friends, and at the beginning of the conversation, me or my friend Lita gives a 15-minute introduction. So you get to hear a little bit about the history of the project, practice it, and then have a kind of meta conversation at the end. And it's a really successful way of sort of growing the practice, but also we get a bunch of feedback to learn about what's working and what's not working from people. We usually advertise it in mutual aid groups. So that has been a really interesting group of people that have come. So I just finished with my partner, Lita Wallace. She's been facilitating workshops with me, the courses with me. We just facilitated a 4-week course called Is This the End or Is This the Beginning? And basically we spent 4 meetings, four kind of evening meetings with people from all over the world, thinking about theoretically and also practically the skills that we need in order to practice the hologram. So we talked about the basic problems of the project for most people are like time, trust, and then 2 sort of bonus pieces are thinking about, instead of problem solving, we thought of wishes, and instead of and then we thought about patterns and how to kind of document and like see patterns and take notes. And in the end, the idea is that the whole group, there's 28 people in the group, 28 people then have the opportunity to sort of set up their own hologram. And the interesting thing is that there's lots of overlap in the group. A lot of the people who went through it now want to create holograms within the group that extend also out, which is cool. And then what's coming out of that is that we are trying to start this summer a kind of community of practice, which means that when we teach courses in the future, or after you do an MVH, you would be invited to a monthly or bi-monthly or twice monthly meeting where you can kind of problem solve and kind of connect with other people doing the hologram, so that it feels more like a movement than as individual therapy. Because I think that there's a really important connection to make that says that we're doing something like together as a part of a movement and not in isolation. Yeah, I think these are just next steps that, if you're interested, have all the information there. The best way to find out about what's happening is to subscribe to the newsletter, and that would help you find out like when future workshops are, and probably, yeah, just contacting me also works. I can also put you on. Yeah. Oops.
Oh, hello, Casey. Thank you so much. First thing I will do is to stop the recording now.